historians always found something new when they looked back. And so I wanted to know if there were any surprises when you were revisiting certain eras of the history, and have your perceptions changed from living through it to doing your research?
You know, one of the things that was surprising was Gulf War I. The politics around Gulf War I. There's a chapter in the book called My Lanta Tisophy, which somebody reviewed it and like criticized that as being Irma Bombeck-ish. I was like, that's a criticism? I've done something of Irma Bombeck quality? I'm so impressed with what was supposed to be an insult. I'm doing this wrong. But the My Lanta reference is from George H.W. Bush's presidential diaries, where he's talking about the decision whether or not to wage Gulf War I, which is, so Saddam Hussein has invaded Kuwait, and George H.W. Bush and his administration is assembling essentially an international coalition to go fight Saddam back within his borders. And he is just racked with this decision that it is all on him as an individual. And he talks about the aching in his shoulders and stomach pain and taking My Lanta, and he talks about my decision, it's my decision, it's my decision, it's my decision. And he resents Congress saying anything about it, saying it's not their decision, I don't know what they're whining about essentially. You know, none of this is on them the way that it's on me, it's all me, my decision. And it's a little overwrought. I mean, he is making a decision about war, but it's not supposed to be him alone. He is not respectful of Congress's role in determining whether or not we are going to war. And Congress is not particularly respectful of its role in deciding whether or not we go to war. The Congress kind of sucked in terms of making that decision. They were not heroes. But there was enough sort of left in terms of their awareness of their constitutional responsibility. There was enough left in terms of the more activist members of Congress who were saying, no, 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 this is our call. That even with George H.W. Bush's My Lanta hand-wringing, and even with the Congress kind of sucking and kind of not getting it together, ultimately through this push-me-pull-you, angst-ridden period of negotiation and shirking responsibility and not being all that impressive, through this sort of morass of political lameness, came ultimately, in time to decide, a brilliant, robust, nonpartisan, not ad hominem, strongly fought debate in Washington, in Congress, about whether or not to wage that war. And you look back at Gulf War I, and we think about it as a war as having been, especially compared to our current wars, or our recent wars, so short and so decisive and something that was so non-divisive. But the debate in Congress and the vote in the Senate was very close. And just going back and reading the transcript of that and seeing how well Congress fought over it, and how they did the right thing in doing that, I believe, that they captured the nation's attention. They brought everybody's focus in the country to the fact that we were about to do this, and to the question of whether or not we ought to. And they had this good debate, and the country paid a lot of attention to it. And when we started that war, Gulf War I, I'm not talking about the merits of the war, I'm talking about the merits of the decision-making process. The entire country was engaged. And when that war was over, and again, not talking about the merits of whether or not it ended when it should, or whether or not we ought to go there in the first place, but when they came home, the entire country felt the war is over. There was a ticker-tape parade in New York City, and the country is engaged in a way that is really absent now. But going back and finding that in the lead up to Gulf War I was a real surprise to me, because I don't remember it that way at all. And I think, especially when you're talking about history that happens during your own lifetime, you want there to be one hero who does something perfect, who you sort of follow through the process. There isn't anybody acting perfectly. There isn't any great decision maker who's making that process admirable. It's just a sign of it being fought well. And that was surprising to find. One other little detail on that which was surprising was that among the activists in Congress who were trying to get a real debate for that war was a small group of of members of Congress who sued George H.W. Bush to stop Gulf War I. They brought a federal lawsuit against the president saying, you don't get to decide whether or not we wage this war. We're Congress, we decide. And the judge in the case, admirable judge, wrote this beautiful opinion explaining that these members of Congress were absolutely correct. The president does not have the power like a king to bring us into war. The founding fathers and the language of the Constitution could not be more clear on this. It is absolutely, absolutely Congress's decision. However, it's not one judge's decision to stop the war on behalf of a handful of members of Congress. Congress, if you want to assert yourselves here, you have to do it as Congress. Get a majority vote, you guys. Come on. It's sort of embarrassing, and everybody's schlubbing their way through history. But ultimately, you do it right.